Hi, I'm Elaine. In this video I'm going to go over more advanced finger picking techniques, such as how to play tabs and how to play the melody line in tabs. If you're looking for an introduction to finger picking, you can check out my other video. For this video, I'll assume that you know 1. The right-handed string assignments. How do you assign your right hand to strings of the ukulele? And 2. The basics of how to read tab. In terms of the video outline, first I'm going to go over the left hand mechanics. The goal here is to minimize movement, and there's 2 tricks. One is to use all of the fingers on your left hand to play the tab and not just your index finger. And 2 is to learn the chord shapes that are underlying the tab. Then I'll go over various ways to improve the musicality of your tab. There's 2 tips here. One is to learn the melody line, and 2 is to learn various flourishes, such as hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, and harmonics. When you're playing a tab with your left hand, your goal is to minimize movements. This will allow you to play a tab more quickly and easily. One way to minimize movement is to use all the fingers of your left hand, in particular your index, middle, and ring fingers, sometimes your pinky, to play the tab. For instance, let's look at the tab for It's Quiet Uptown from Hamilton. If you are just playing this with your index finger, it would look and sound something like this. So you'll notice that there was a lot of sliding around on the fretboard, which is hard to do and hard to do quickly. Now, how might we go about using all of the fingers on our left hand to play this tab? To start, you can put the ring finger of your left hand onto the A fret of the A string and play those 4 notes. And then to go to the E string, all you have to do is put down your middle finger on the 8th fret of the E string. You move your index finger to the 5th fret of the E string. Then you can move your ring finger to the 7th fret of the C string, and then index finger on the 5th fret of the C string. So again, from the top, it would look and sound something like this. Which involves a lot less left hand movements than just using your index finger to play the whole tab. Another thing to note here is what my right hand was doing. Recall from before that we would have at most 1 finger per string. So for instance, you might have your thumb on the G string, thumb on the C string, index finger on the E string, and middle finger on the A string. However, for this particular case, I was using both my thumb and index fingers to pick a string, and this allows you to play the notes faster. For instance, I'll demonstrate just on the A string. It'll look and sound something like this. If you alternate picking a string with your thumb and index fingers, you can play the notes more quickly in a tab. Another technique to help you minimize your left-handed movements is to learn the chord shapes. For instance, let's look at the tab for Hey There Delilah by the Plain White T's. I also went over this in the previous video. If you just look at the tab and you naively try to play it with just your index finger, it would look and sound something like this. That's hard to play and sounds kind of choppy. However, the key insight here is that 2010 is the F major chord shape. So instead of just using your index finger, you can hold down the F major chord shape with your left hand and then use your right hand to play the corresponding notes. So you'd start by plucking the G string, and then you'd pluck all the other strings, and you just repeat that 4 times. In general, there are 3 steps for learning the underlying chord shapes for a tab. First, look at the tab and see what chords there are. For this case, it's helpful to know what chords there are in the song. For instance, you can know that Hey There Delilah has an F and A minor chords, and look for those shapes in the tab. Second, start with a chord shape. That means put your left hand in the position to play the chord. For instance, for Hey There Delilah, you can put your left hand into the F major chord shape. Third, you can adjust your left hand positioning as needed to play the tab. Now, if you have a regular picking pattern, such as for Hey There Delilah, you don't need to make any left hand adjustments, and it suffices to hold down the F major chord for the entire picking pattern. However, if you have a more complicated tab, you may need to adjust your left hand positioning as needed to play the tab. However, it's important to still start with a chord shape. This will give you a suggestion of what fingers to use to play various notes, and it's a lot easier to play a tab if you start by playing the chord shape as opposed to just using arbitrary fingers to play the tab. Let's use what we've learned so far to learn the riff of Redbone by Childish Gambino. First I'll show you the unannotated riff, and I'll play through it so you can get it into your ears. How would you go about learning this riff? A good place to start would be to learn the underlying chord shapes for the tab. First, look at the tab and see what chords there are. It helps to know what chords there are in the song. In the case of Redbone, the chords are B flat, C, and D minor. In the case of the riff, you can see that you start with a B flat chord, 3, 2, 1, 1. Then you go to a C major chord, and you only play part of it. And then you go to a D minor chord, which is 2, 2, 1, 0. Then the second step is to start with a chord shape. You'll want to put your left hand in the position to play the chord. And then the third step is to modify the chord shape as needed to actually play the riff. I'll go over how to play the first little bit of the Redbone riff in more detail. You can use the same process for learning the rest of the riff as well. So to start, you'll start with the B flat chord shape, ring finger on the G string, middle finger on the C string, index finger barring the E and A strings, and you'll just play that chord. To play the open A string, you can lift up your index finger. And then to play the third fret of the E string, I use my ring finger, and then I use my index finger to play the first fret of the E string. So again, from the top, the first little bit looks and sounds something like this. So as you can see, you start by playing the chord shape, and then you modify the chord shape slightly to get the notes in the riff. What does your left hand do to play the notes that aren't part of the chords? One technique is to assign your fingers to particular frets of the ukulele. For instance, you can assign your index finger to the first fret, middle finger to the second fret, and ring finger to the third fret, and if need be, you can also assign your pinky finger to the fourth fret, though you don't need to for the Redbone riff. Going back to the example we went over, you'll start by playing the B flat chord shape, lift up. Since your ring finger is in charge of the third fret, you can move it to the third fret of the E string, and since your index finger is in charge of the first fret, you play the first fret of the E string with your index finger. So again, from the top, you have chord, riff, ring, indexed. So you can use the same method for learning the rest of the riff as well. To summarize this section, the goal is to minimize movement in your left hand. That way you can play tabs more quickly and easily. The first tip is to use all of the fingers on your left hand. That way you aren't just using your index finger and doing something like this. That's hard to do, sounds choppy, and it's hard to play. The second tip is to learn the underlying chord shapes for a tab. This gives you a suggestion of what fingers to use. You can also keep in mind that you can assign fingers to particular frets of the ukulele, and that'll give you a template to use when learning future tabs. Now I'll talk about ways to improve the musicality of a tab. How do you make a tab sound more like music? One tip here is to learn the melody line if your tab has one. This helps you know what notes to emphasize. For instance, let's look at the Redbone tab from before, but this time I bolded the notes in the melody. First, I'll play you just the bolded notes so you can get what the melody line sounds like alone. listen for that line when I play through the full riff. Learning the melody line is also useful if you're writing a tab. It helps you know what notes to include or not include. In the case of Redbone, recall that the chords are B flat, C, and D minor. However, we're only playing part of the C major chord and not the full C major chord. The reason for this is that you perceive the melody usually as the highest note that you're playing. So as an example, I'll just play through the first bit of the Redbone tab, but I'll play the full C major chord instead of just part of it. It would sound something like this. You notice that you'll hear the melody as instead of the actual melody. Because of this, I didn't include the full C major chord as part of the Redbone tab because playing the 3rd fret of the A string, this high note here, messes up your perception of the melody line. Another way to improve musicality and make tabs sound more like music is by adding various flourishes such as hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, and harmonics. I'll start by going over what hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides are, and for these examples we'll primarily just be looking at the A string, so we don't need to worry about any of the other strings. Hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides are ways of playing 2 notes while only plucking once. They're named after what your left hand is doing. So for instance, let's first look at 0, hammer-on to 2, notated as 0H2 on the A string. To start, you would pluck the A string, and then you would take your finger on your left hand and then hammer it onto the 2nd fret without plucking again. So it look and sound something like this. Next, let's look at a pull-off, which is the same thing, but in reverse. So 2, pull-off, 0, would be you pluck the 2nd fret of the A string and then you lift up your finger. A slide is when you take your finger and then you slide it to a different fret. So 2 slide 3, 2S3 would look and sound something like this. Here's a tab for Exile by Taylor Swift so you can see how you might use hammer-ons within the context of a song. To start with a chord shape. Hold down the G major chord shape and then just play the chord twice. And then you would play the 2nd fret of the A string, which you're already holding down. Use your pinky finger to play the 5th fret of the A string. Lift up your pinky. And then you have 0H2, which you can play with your middle finger, lift up, and hammer back on. So again, from the top, it sounds like this. Then you do something similar for the E minor chord. Play the E minor chord twice. 3rd fret of the E string, which you're already holding down. Lift up your index finger to play the open A string. Go back to the E string. And then use your middle finger to play the 0, hammer on to 3. So again, it sounds like. Finally, I'll go over harmonics. Harmonics are a chime-like sound you can produce by lightly touching pits of the fretboard and plucking, but without actually pressing down on the string. You can only produce harmonics on specific frets. So for my ukulele, you can have one on the 12th fret, 7th fret, 5th fret, and on the 3rd fret, but it's a little quiet. If you're practicing harmonics, it's helpful to just practice on the 12th fret because it's easiest to hear the harmonic there. Harmonics are noted by a number next to a little x, so 12x is a harmonic on the 12th fret. If you're practicing, I would suggest lightly touching down on the fret line. Notice that I'm not actually pressing down, and then just try plucking so you can hear the sound. You'll notice that if you don't lift your left hand, the sound is muted, But if you lift your left hand and you practice that a few times, you should be able to eventually get a clear bell-like sound. And this is a good way to add variety when you're playing a tab. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around till the end. If we weren't in quarantine, I would probably bake you some vegan cupcakes. I hope that this video helped you learn more advanced fingerpicking techniques. If you need a refresher on the basics, you can check out my Intro to Fingerpicking video. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can hit the little bell icon and you'll get notified whenever I put out a new video. I'll make a new video every Sunday. Thanks for watching.